I'm Hunter from Tilting Point, Senior Product Manager, and Tilting Point, for those of you who don't know, is a free-to-play mobile gaming publisher. So to vastly simplify what we do, and my BD department's going to hate me for this, is we partner with independent developers and do a bunch of marketing and user acquisition to help scale their games and make them super successful and awesome. Vast simplification. BD's not here though, so it's fine. And I sort of want to walk you through a fun dynamic that I see a lot between the developers that we work with and the marketing teams that we frequently use. Basically, the product manager on the other team will be the users that the marketing team are giving us just aren't good enough. They aren't lifting up the KPIs we need. The marketing team's not bringing the success we need to actually succeed. And on the other side, the UA team, the ASO team saying, the app's terrible. We just can't retain users. The LTV is god-awful. It's not working out. And we're sorry, we can't bring this game success. And it becomes this back and forth dichotomy of, okay, is it the app that's the problem? Is it the users that are the problem? And this inevitable cycle. And I get to sit in the middle of it, which is so much fun, of course. Basically saying, okay, let's all just make a bunch of money, get a bunch of people to install the game, and everything's going to be great, which is the dream. And so during the course of this talk, I have about 13 minutes left. I basically want to do a little refresher course, because I'm sure we've all encountered this sort of problem before. Basically, why this conflict occurs between the marketing and the product team, whether it's internal, between two teams internally, or between an agency and the developer of the original app. It's something that seems to occur across the board. And how we can actually reduce this conflict moving forward. At least things that I've had success in. And so first, always establish our terms. Who are the marketing team? Most of the people in this room, I'd imagine, which are basically the people who are acquiring users for the apps. Everyone who are funneling in the people who are the product team's going to make the money off of. This includes the user acquisition team, the people who are doing the Facebook, the Instagram, UAC, so on and so forth. The ASO team, the people who are responsible for the organics, search engine optimization, these sorts of things. Maybe some brand marketing people if you're working with an IP, which we frequently do. And the terms that these people are usually working around are like CPI, LTV, CPA, a whole bunch of other stuff that I've been listed out all throughout today. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, the product team, their job is to make the money, to drive the actual revenue from the users that the marketing team gives us, and keep people engaged, keep people retained over long periods of time. And so this includes the engineers who are pumping out the actual updates, the designers who are designing what those updates should be, the live ops people, and the wonderful push notification people who are annoying us with emojis too much, apparently. And the other product managers like myself who just want to shout about money all the time. And generally the KPIs we're talking about are in terms of ARPDAU, engagement, retention. Again, I'm vastly simplifying a lot of this stuff, but these are the broad groups. And so each of these teams, as we can see, are deeply reliant on each other. One has to acquire the users, one has to make the revenue from the users. If there's no app, there's no marketing. If there's no marketing, there's no app. And so it's this symbiotic relationship, but both teams talk in very different ways. The KPIs are very different for both teams. The skill set does not really have much overlap. And so to run you through is definitely not the most healthy example of a sort of conflict that can occur. You can have, and this has definitely never happened to me at all in the history of my time at Tilting Point, so no quoting me on this. You have an app that's getting 10,000 downloads organically per day. Wonderful, everything's great, you're getting a lot of downloads, no money's being spent, it's wonderful. And then suddenly one day it drops to 5K overnight with no reason. And so naturally the product team, who's responsible for the revenue, is going to be freaking out and shouting at the ASO team, what are you doing? What did you guys change? What basically did you guys break in this sort of hostile environment? And the ASO team may fire back on the defensive saying, well, the game performance dropped, or it's never been very good to begin with, so obviously Google finally caught on to the game wasn't great, and we're dropping it in the overall algorithm. And so no one has to worry about it anymore. And then the product team's like, well, we didn't actually change anything. It's been this bad, or not bad, forever. And so why is that possible? And then you get in this vicious cycle of going back and forth between the two teams, which doesn't actually solve the actual problem. And so why this conflict occurs, as we just saw, basically boiled down to the center of it is people don't like what they can't control or understand when their entire job relies on it. So the product team is entirely reliant on the UA marketing team to do anything. Period. End of story. They cannot hit any of their KPIs. They cannot succeed without it. And same thing with the marketing team. They need the LTV that the product team provides. And so it's a symbiotic relationship, but neither team, they're both isolated from each other. They're both usually not working together very much cross-functionally, and they don't share any of the same tools. One team may be using Adjust and AppsFlyer for detailed data analysis. The other one's using Amplitude. You can be looking at very different KPIs. And so this lack of synergy between the teams, lack of discussion, lack of common things, means there's a lot of distrust because you don't understand what the other team's doing. And during massive crises, that gets exacerbated drastically, and you get a lot of pointing fingers to shift blame off of yourselves. So what do we actually do about it now that we've established that there's an actual problem here, or very frequently a problem? Well, first of all, and I'm going to spoil everything, every one of the future slides just says talking to people. Tends to be the most efficient way to solve most problems, in my opinion. And so, first of all, the first thing you're going to talk about is, what are the actual ground rules for this game, for this company? What do we want to do together? Let's get everyone on the same page, same foundation. What are we doing here? So what's the company objective with this app, with this game, whatever? Is it sunsetted? Do we not want to really put any effort into it in the future? Or is it the new awesome flagship product that's going to be amazing and we need to put an insane amount of effort and we need to be very careful with? And that also helps determine the risks that you're willing to take. How much can you bend the envelope? How much is the company relying on these objectives? And how cautious you need to be. Then you need to discuss, okay, who are we actually making this app for? Who's the audience? And that can help you determine some of what you do in the marketing and the product side of things, and what your expectations from both teams can be. So it also helps determine what your baseline KPIs are. Spotify versus Tinder are going to have a little bit of different metrics. I at least assume so. As well as a lot of the different genres in gaming have a lot of different metrics as well. And so by establishing who your audience is, are you targeting 40-year-old women or are you talking 20-year-old guys? They're going to behave differently, and so you need to establish that all together. So once you actually have what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and everyone's on the same page here, everything's hunky-dory, you go to, how are we going to actually execute on that vision? Well, you need a roadmap. I don't know about you guys, but frequently I've seen a lot of product roadmaps, but it's a little bit more of a chore to get the marketing team to detail out extremely detailed roadmaps long-terms in the future, as opposed to on a day-to-day basis or month-to-month basis. And so obviously you need a 12-month roadmap to have things marked out for a long period of time, but the next quarter is the most important part because that's in the visible future at the very least. And so you need to meet at the beginning of the quarter and say, this is what we're going to do from both sides of the aisle. This is what we want to do across this quarter. This is what we're scheduling. These are the metrics that it's going to affect. If I'm changing the FTUI completion rate, or if I'm changing the FTUI and the onboarding flow, that's going to affect the D1 retention. I need to make that clear to the marketing team that say, hey guys, just so you know, August 5th, we're going to change the tutorial. That means that there could be some changes in your overall D1 metrics, so look out for that. So that way when it happens, we avoid some of the confusion or the stress that the team actually may have. And so that also then tells them, okay, we see a massive drop in D1 retention at this point. That's why it's probably happening, because we just pushed out this change. Also, recommendation is don't schedule all these things at the same time. I have done that before. It is not fun because I have pushed out once and an app icon changed, a store asset changed, new sales system in the game that I was working on, and a few other things in the update at the same time, and something broke. And it took a long time to figure out what broke, and it is not fun. So definitely the other purpose of this roadmap is to make sure none of you are changing all the things at the same time and you're all talking to each other. That way when something goes wrong, you're not pointing fingers. It's very clear what actually occurred. And so once you have that regular roadmap, you're going to have to keep talking to each other. You don't just get to talk once a quarter. You need to talk regularly, preferably weekly. If you really like each other, you can talk daily. I'm not going to stop you. But the general idea is that you need to build up trust between teams. You need to have regular meetings to address any sudden changes, because as we know, roadmaps never change in any way, shape, or form. And when you make them, they are perfect from the beginning, and never experience any delays from engineers, period. And so you need to regularly meet to address those theoretical delays. And the other important part here is not just to regularly meet with each other and just report facts back and forth with each other. The whole goal is to build up trust between each other and develop trust between the teams. And also importantly, you want to tell the other person how you're doing your job and what all the weird acronyms you're using mean. That way the other person, when you're saying CPA, CPM, IPM, blah, 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 actually understands what you're saying, why you're saying it, and how it impacts the overall metrics of the game, and how we can make this more successful in the future so that you're actually speaking the same language. It takes a lot of time. I remember when I was first starting as a PM, I would sit down with my UA department and I'd have like an hour-long meeting in each week. And half of it was them just telling me how the hell they did their job and why it was important. But that then facilitated a lot of growth on my end and provided me the ability to actually communicate with them and suggest things and go back and forth, and solved a lot of potential conflicts, because I could see, oh, there's a change that you guys did in Facebook that may change the user flow, and that's why the CPIs are higher now, because we're actually targeting purchases rather than just installs, and so that's why I'm seeing some of these fluctuations in overall installs, rather than coming to them and saying, why the hell are all these changes occurring? Which tends to be less healthy of an approach. And most importantly, when you're in these conversations, when you're in these crises, you want to lead with solutions and trying to help the other party in solving their problem, rather than just saying, why is this occurring? What have you done? And being rather confrontational here. And so let's return to our example with the organic drop. The product team in this more healthy example, if we incorporate some of the solutions that we had discussed previously, says, hey, ASO team, organics just dropped from 10K to 5K overnight. Kind of bad. We should probably fix this. We didn't do anything. You guys didn't do anything according to your roadmap. Let's double check that no one made the wrong switch, obviously. And here's some helpful information, because we know iOS and Android are different. It looks like it's only Android. We've done some digging already on our end because we understand some of the issues. And then the ASO team might come back and say, it's a hypothetical example, so it actually has a solution easily of, oh, look, the drop happens to be coming on Android from, let's say, the Explorer or the recommendation engine, and we know that the ANR weighting that Google does on bad behavior thresholds has changed a little bit recently. And so that might be then reducing us in the algorithm, even though we didn't actually change anything and it's not our fault. It's obviously Google's fault and they just don't like us. And so the product team will then say, okay, we obviously have to reprioritize the roadmap and move our ANR fixes up a little bit, or investigate that so that we can have all those extra users. Meanwhile, the ASO team, well, we still need to hit our overall metrics, obviously. So just because we've dropped 50% in users and the product team's on it doesn't mean we can sit back, because again, solutions, not problems, and it's not just someone else's problem. And so we need to figure out whatever optimizations we can do, A/B testing across the environment, that we can do to offset this mass user loss that we just occurred. And that's a more healthy version of the conversation that we saw earlier on. And so basically the key takeaways from this talk are marketing and product teams usually like fighting together and don't really understand each other. And conflict basically occurs at the root of this between the supply and the demand side of the business is basically overlapping dependencies. Each one requires each other to actually do anything, period, and to succeed. And that is stressful. And when the other team doesn't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it, it causes even more stress. And when people are stressed and they're in the middle of a crisis, you're going to get very mad and you're going to start pointing fingers rather than being productive. And so in order to work around that, you work through making sure that everyone understands what you're trying to do with the app and the overall company objective, what risks you're willing to take. If you're working on an IP, you're not going to be able to take as many risks as you would like to on either the product or the marketing side. So understanding the bounds of what you're allowed to get away with. And then after establishing what you want to do, Now you establish how you're doing it. You establish a roadmap as ideally 12 months in advance, but with 1 quarter at least ahead checked off, with each week something is slotted in of what you're doing on every side. And then talking and explaining to each other on regular meetings how you're actually going about your job. Are things on track? Are there delays, which is of course impossible, and explaining the function to each other of how you're doing and building up each other's understandings of things. And if we do all of that, then we'll be able to make awesome apps, make a shit ton of money, and everyone will be super happy and there's no stress. Thanks everyone, and I think I'm going to be ushered off stage, so thanks very much.